Picture this. You're 17 years old, walking home through your own neighborhood. It's a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the sky's clear, the air smells like spring, and your only plan is to get home. Grab a snack and study for your math quiz. You're not doing anything wrong, you're just walking. But then, out of nowhere flashing lights, sirens, 2 police cars pull up behind you. Officers step out. One of them puts a hand on their belt. And just like that, everything changes. This is how it started for him. He had finished tutoring at the local community center, something he did every Tuesday and Thursday without fail. He loved helping the younger kids, especially with reading. It reminded him of his own journey. He'd come far. He was proud of that. His grades were strong, his teachers always had kind things to say, and his mom, she was proud too. She raised him to be calm, respectful, and thoughtful. He didn't talk back, didn't make trouble. He followed the rules. That day, he wore his favorite navy hoodie, the one with the school logo on the front, and carried the same backpack he always did. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. He was just walking down Elm Street, passing the same houses he had passed 100 times before. Big houses, clean yards, perfect gardens. The kind of street where nothing bad ever happened. He took out his phone and read the text from his mom. Running late. Key is under the blue flower pot. Love you. He smiled to himself. That's how they always did it. Simple, safe, normal. He turned into his driveway, bent down to lift the blue pot, and reached for the key. That's when he felt something movement, a presence behind him. Then came the sound. Sirens, close ones. Not off in the distance. Right behind him. He stood up slowly, key in hand. His heart started to beat faster, but his face stayed calm. He'd been taught what to do in situations like this. Across the street, behind a white curtain, someone had been watching him. Early that same afternoon, a woman in her 50s had been arranging flowers in her kitchen. Her house was spotless, her lawn perfectly trimmed, her routines unshaken. She had lived in that neighborhood for 5 years, knew every dog, every car, every mailbox. And when she saw someone she didn't recognize walking slowly, checking his phone, stopping, she didn't see a student. She didn't see someone coming home. She saw something else, something suspicious. She stared harder. He had a backpack. He stopped, looked at a house, then bent down. Her heart started racing. Thoughts rushed in. What if he was trying to break in? What if he was checking to see who wasn't home? She'd seen crime shows. She knew how these things started. She reached for her phone and dialed 911. Her voice was steady when she spoke. Yes, hello, I'd like to report a suspicious person. Young male, looks like a teenager. He's been walking back and forth, stopping to look at houses. He's carrying a backpack. It just seems off. Please send someone. The call didn't take long. The officers were already nearby. They turned onto Elm Street with lights flashing, ready to check out the situation. Back at the house, the boy stood still, not knowing why police cars were suddenly surrounding him. 2 officers stepped out, 1 male, 1 female. They didn't have their weapons drawn, but their presence was heavy. The male officer looked tense. The female officer looked more calm but alert. "Excuse me, son," she said, her voice clear but not aggressive. "We got a call about someone acting suspicious in this neighborhood. Can you tell us what you're doing here?" He looked at her and replied, calmly and respectfully, "This is my house. I live here with my mom. I was just getting the key from under the pot like she told me to." "Do you have any ID on you?" she asked. "Yes, in my backpack." "I'm going to reach for it slowly," he said, narrating every movement. The officers nodded. The moment was tense, still, uncertain, and across the street, the woman who made the call watched it all unfold from behind her curtains. She was waiting for something. Waiting for her suspicions to be confirmed. Waiting for the officers to find something wrong. But what they found was a teenage boy holding a key to his own front door. A boy who had just finished volunteering. A boy whose only mistake was being seen by someone who didn't know him and assumed the worst. And this was just the beginning. From her kitchen window, she watched closely, eyes narrowed, fingers still curled around her phone as the police officers stepped onto the sidewalk. She had never called the police before, not once in 5 years of living there, but she'd thought about it plenty. In fact, she had rehearsed this exact scenario in her mind many times. She would be the neighbor who noticed, the one who acted, the one who kept Elm Street safe. She felt a mix of nerves and pride now. This was what being a responsible citizen looked like, wasn't it? Inside her own head, she believed she was doing the right thing. This wasn't about race. She told herself that again and again. It was about behavior. Suspicious behavior. A young man, someone unfamiliar walking. Slowly stopping, pulling something from under a pot. That was enough to make anyone nervous, wasn't it? She glanced down at the flowers on her counter, untouched. Her heart was beating faster now, and not from fear. From a strange kind of anticipation. Outside, the teen handed over his ID. Female officers studied it. Everything matched. Name, address, age, nothing alarming. Nothing even unusual. Still, protocol was protocol. Is there anyone else at home who can verify you live here? She asked. My mom's at work, he replied, still calm. But I can call her. At that moment, the woman inside, still watching, still waiting, made her move. She walked out her front door, stepping onto the porch with a sense of importance. As if this scene involved her personally, as if the officers had been waiting for her opinion, she crossed the street quickly, her heels clicking against the concrete, stopping just behind the officers. Officers, hi, she said, inserting herself into the conversation without hesitation. I'm the one who called. I've been watching him for the past 20 minutes, and his behavior was, well, it was unusual. The officers turned slightly to acknowledge her, but the woman didn't wait to be asked. She continued. He kept walking back and forth, looking at the houses. I didn't recognize him, and I've lived here long enough to know who belongs and who doesn't. The boy looked at her for the first time. She was a stranger to him, but she spoke as if she knew everything about him. This is my house. He repeated gently, not raising his voice. I was just getting the key like my mom told me to. The woman folded her arms. Well, that's what he says now, she muttered, not loud, but loud enough. The officers stayed professional, but the mood was shifting. The male officer's jaw was tight. The female officer asked again, Do you mind calling your mother just to confirm? Sure, he said. No problem. He took out his phone and dialed. It rang twice. Hey, Mom, everything's okay, but can you come home? The police are here. The neighbor thought I looked suspicious. There was a pause. The woman across the street watched the boy's face. He didn't look scared. He looked tired. Like he had lived this moment before, even if this was the first time. Behind the scenes of this quiet neighborhood, behind the trim lawns and neatly parked cars, something deeper had surfaced. Something people like to believe didn't exist. Here, something uncomfortable. The woman still standing close, still insisting she was right, glanced toward the house again. It was clean, painted in soft tones, a well-kept yard. The boy didn't look dangerous. He didn't even look particularly angry. That made her nervous in a different way. He shouldn't be so calm. Why was he so calm? Because he had been raised. For this moment, inside her house, she had told herself she was just being cautious, that she would have called the police no matter who it was, that it wasn't about color, it was about behavior. But the longer she stood there, the more that belief felt shaky. And now she was realizing something she hadn't expected. This wasn't going the way she thought it would. The police weren't cuffing him. They weren't asking aggressive questions. They were listening to him. She wasn't the one being listened to. The teen ended the call and said, My mom's on her way. Shouldn't be long. The woman looked up the street. The silence hung heavy now. No one else had come outside. No one else seemed concerned. And for the first time, she began to feel the edges of something she didn't like doubt. Had she jumped too quickly? Had she let fear speak louder than facts? The female officer glanced at the boy's license again. You said you volunteer. Yes, at the community center. After school. The male officer looked at the woman. Ma'am, did you actually see him go near any houses besides this one? She hesitated. No, but he looked like he was thinking about it. That silence came again. This time it wasn't just awkward, it was revealing. Then came the sound of a car door closing in the distance. Someone was coming, and everything was about to change. The sound of a car pulling up wasn't loud, but it felt like thunder in that quiet neighborhood. Every head turned toward the end of the street, where a dark sedan had just come to a smooth stop. The driver's side door opened, and a woman stepped out. She wasn't rushing, but her stride was confident, measured, like she was walking into a meeting she was expected to take charge of. She wore a navy blue suit, simple but sharp. Her hair was tied back neatly, and she carried a bag over one shoulder, not the kind of bag you sling over a chair, but one that looked like it had documents in it. Official ones. She didn't need to speak to get attention. The officers stood a little straighter. Even the neighbor who called them so full of certainty just minutes ago took an instinctive step back. The teen smiled. A tired, relieved kind of smile. That's my mom. She walked right up to them, calm but focused. Her eyes flicked between the officers, then to her son. She touched his shoulder lightly, checking without asking if he was all right. Then she looked at the neighbor, but said nothing yet. Good afternoon, she said to the officers, her tone even. I'm his mother. I understand there was a situation here. Yes, ma'am, the female officer replied. We received a call about suspicious behavior. Your son was fully cooperative. He showed us ID. Everything checks out. I see, the mother said, nodding slightly. Then she turned to the woman standing across from her, who suddenly didn't look quite as confident. And you are? The mother asked, still calm. I'm the one who called, the woman said quickly, straightening her shoulders. He was walking up and down the street looking at houses. I've never seen him before. It looked suspicious. I was just trying to be cautious. The mother tilted her head, her expression unreadable. You saw a young man walking down the street toward his own home, and that was suspicious to you? The neighbor faltered for a beat. Well, not just that. He kept stopping and looking around, and he had a backpack. I didn't know who he was, so you assumed he didn't belong? No, I know. I just didn't recognize him, that's all. This is a quiet street. I've lived here 5 years. I know most of the residents. The mother's voice stayed steady, but there was steel under the surface now. We've lived here for 3. That landed heavy. The neighbor blinked. Oh, well, I guess I just haven't seen him before. Maybe, the mother said, softly, or maybe you did see him before, but didn't take the time to really notice him. The woman didn't have an answer to that. She glanced away, suddenly unsure where to look. Her fingers fidgeted with her sleeve. The male officer broke the silence. Ma'am, just to ask, what is it you do for work? She didn't hesitate. She reached into her bag, pulled out her credentials, and handed them over without a word. The officers looked down, read the badge, and their entire demeanor shifted. FBI, Regional Director, Civil Rights Division. The officers exchanged a glance. The neighbor's face went pale. You could almost hear the pieces falling into place in her head. The mother wasn't just another parent defending her child. She was someone with authority, someone with experience, someone who had seen this kind of situation more times than she could count, and now it had happened to her own son. I appreciate how you both handled this, she said to the officers. You remained professional. You asked fair questions. You listened. That matters. They nodded, grateful. Then she turned back to the woman who had made the call. I want you to think about something, she said, her tone no longer soft. My son has done nothing wrong. He was walking home. He used the key I left for him. The only reason we're standing here right now is because you assumed he didn't belong, because of how he looked, because you didn't recognize his face. That assumption, that bias could have cost him more than just a few minutes of discomfort. The woman's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I've worked in law enforcement for over 2 decades. The mother continued. I've seen how quickly these moments can go wrong. How fast a call like yours can spiral into something far more dangerous, especially for a young black teenager. Her voice wasn't raised, but it had weight. It filled the street. The truth in her words didn't need volume to echo. I didn't mean any harm, the neighbor whispered. But you did cause harm, the mother replied. Even if you didn't mean to. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't tense. It was heavy with realization. Across the street, a curtain shifted. Someone else had been watching quietly. Word would spread fast on Elm Street. Maybe faster than the woman wanted it to. The boy didn't say anything. He stood still, shoulders back, just like his mother had taught him. Not angry, not afraid, just grounded. A storm had passed around him, but he hadn't let it move. The moment wasn't over. But the power had shifted. The woman who had made the call stood frozen, as if her feet were glued to the pavement. She wasn't the center of the story anymore, but somehow she still couldn't walk away. Her reasons, once so sure and solid, in her mind now felt like they were cracking beneath her. The officer stood quietly now, letting the moment breathe. The teen remained calm beside his mother, holding himself with a kind of quiet strength one he'd learned not from books or school, but from years of watching her lead. The mother looked at the officers again. Before I go, I'd like one. Thing noted in your report, she said, still polite, but direct. Yes, ma'am, the female officer replied. She pointed gently to her son. He's 17. He's a straight-A student. He just finished tutoring younger children at the community center. He came home using the key I told him to find. I'd like that to be part of the official record. The officers nodded double quotes, and she continued, I'd like it noted that. The caller did not see him commit any crime, did not see him approach any home other than his own, and could not identify any specific behavior beyond the fact that she didn't recognize him. The woman across from her flushed again. It was one thing to be wrong. It was another to hear your assumptions spoken back to you with such clarity. I thought I was doing the right thing. The woman said, her voice lower now, her tone less certain. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood, that's all. The mother looked at her for a long moment. Safe from what? She asked, almost gently. The woman didn't answer. The mother didn't wait for one. She turned back to her son, ready to leave. The worst of it was over for now. But as they stepped toward the door, the boy hesitated. Something inside him had shifted too. Something he couldn't quite name yet, but he felt it. He turned to the woman who had made the call. You don't know me, he said quietly, but I've walked past your house maybe 100 times. I've never bothered anyone, never done anything wrong. You just never saw me. She didn't respond. But something flickered in her expression. Maybe shame. Maybe reflection. Maybe both. They went inside, and the door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. The neighbor stood alone on the sidewalk, still holding her phone, unsure what to do with it now. The officers said nothing. They were already writing their notes, speaking softly to one another, their body language different from when they'd arrived. It had only taken a few minutes for everything to happen. A few minutes, and the whole street felt different. Inside the house, the mother placed her bag down on the table and let out a long breath. The kind of breath she'd learned to take when things didn't go wrong, but could have. Her son looked at her. You okay? She nodded. Yeah, you? I'm okay. He said it, but his voice wasn't full of certainty. Not yet. He sat down on the couch, suddenly feeling more tired than before. You handled yourself perfectly, she said. I'm proud of you. He nodded. I remembered what you taught me. That's why I taught you, she said. Then added, more quietly, I just wish you didn't need to remember it. There was a pause between them, full of things unsaid. Full of how many times they had practiced that script, how to speak to police, how to keep hands visible, how to smile just enough to look non-threatening without looking smug, how to survive a situation that should never have happened in the first place. She really thought it was dangerous. He said the mother didn't correct him. She didn't soften the truth. She didn't know you, she said. And when people don't know someone, sometimes they fill in the blanks with fear. She didn't even ask who I was. She just assumed. She looked at you and her fear filled in the story. He sat with that for a minute, then asked, Do you think she learned anything? The mother thought about it. She had asked that same question about dozens of people in her career. Some did. Some didn't. I think she's thinking right now. She said finally, I think she's replaying everything in her head, whether or not she changes. That's up to her. Will you report it? Yes, not to punish her. But because if no one reports these things, people think they don't happen. Outside, the police were finishing their notes. The neighbor had already retreated to her porch, no longer interested in being the center of attention, but inside her home, something else was happening. She had spent 5 years learning every face, every car, every detail of her neighborhood, but today she realized there were entire lives just across the street that she had never taken the time to understand, and now she would have to live with the fact that her concern had been based on nothing but a boy's skin color and a backpack, that her fear had called in flashing lights and sirens for a teen who was just trying to open his front door, and no matter what she told herself, she would never forget the way the FBI badge had looked in the mother's hand, so calm, so clear, so impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a wake-up call. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky now, casting long orange streaks across the sidewalks of Elm Street. It was the kind of light that softened everything except the tension still lingering in the air. Inside the house, the mother stood by the kitchen window, watching the patrol car slowly pull away. Her hand was resting on the counter, but her mind was still outside. She'd done this kind of thing before, uncovering bias, speaking up in meetings, standing up for those who couldn't, but today it had been personal. Too personal, it had happened to her son. And no badge, no job title, no years of experience could take away what that felt like. In the living room, her son was quiet. He had his calculus book open on his lap, but he hadn't turned a page in 15 minutes. His eyes were focused on a single formula, but his mind wasn't doing math. It was playing the moment back over and over. The sirens, the voices. The way the officers had looked at him before asking who he was. The way the neighbor had spoken as if she owned the truth. He had always known things like this could happen. His mom had made sure of that. Not out of fear, but out of preparation. She always told him, I hope you never need these lessons, but I need you to have them. Now he had lived one. And he wasn't sure what to do with it. He heard footsteps and looked up. His mom walked in, holding a plate of fruit and a sandwich, the way she always did when she knew words might not be enough. She placed it on the table and sat down next to him. You don't have to pretend you're okay, she said gently. He didn't pretend. I don't get it, he finally said. I was doing everything right. I know. I didn't look angry. I wasn't loud. I didn't run. I even smiled. You did everything right, she said again. This wasn't about you doing something wrong. This was about her doing something wrong. He nodded, but it didn't help much. And if you hadn't shown up when you did? His mother exhaled slowly. That's the part that scares me too. There was a beat of silence between them. Then, after a long pause, he asked, Do you think she believed her own story? The question hung in the air. She turned it over in her mind. Yes, she said. I think she believed she was just protecting the neighborhood. I think she really told herself it had nothing to do with race. But it did. Yes, it did. Then how can she not see it? His mother leaned forward slightly. Her voice was soft, but serious. Because saying it would mean admitting something very uncomfortable about herself. That the problem wasn't out there, it was inside her, and most people aren't ready to face that. He looked at his hands, his palms flat against the book in front of him. I never even walked on her side of the street. His mom smiled faintly, a sad smile. You didn't have to, you just existed. That truth sat between them like a quiet weight. In the house across the street, the woman who made the call sat alone in her kitchen, her phone face down on the counter, untouched. She had planned to make soup that night. She had pulled out the carrots and celery hours ago. But now they sat, dry and limp on the cutting board, untouched like her sense of control. She was thinking harder than she had in a long time. She replayed it all again, his face, the key in his hand, the calmness in his voice, the mother's sharp questions, the badge. The badge that had made her stomach turn not out of fear, but out of shame. She thought she was being smart, careful, a good neighbor. But what kind of neighbor calls the police on a teenager who lives across the street? What kind of neighbor watches for years but never really sees? She glanced out the window and saw the blue flower pot, the one she had never noticed before, right in front of the house, in plain sight, for 3 years. She hadn't been paying attention. Or maybe she had just been paying attention to the wrong things. Across the street, the boy stood and stretched, walking to the window next to his. Mother, they both looked out. She saw them. And they saw her. It wasn't an angry look. It wasn't a stare of judgment. It was something quieter, a pause, an opening. She looked away first, her eyes falling back to the cooling soup ingredients, her mind too loud to cook now. The mother placed a hand gently on her son's back. You know, she said, people don't change because you yell at them. They change because something shakes their story. Something makes them stop and question it. He nodded slowly. You think today shook her story? His mom thought for a moment, then said, I think today cracked it. The boy looked down. The street. The sun had dipped lower now, and the shadows stretched across the road like slow-moving waves. He didn't feel angry anymore. He felt older. That's what days like this do. They don't just leave a memory, they mark a shift. And he had just crossed one. The next morning, the neighborhood felt different, not louder, not quieter, just heavier somehow. Like the air itself remembered what had happened the day before, even if no one was talking about it. He walked the same path he always did, same hoodie, same backpack, same stride. The same houses lined the sidewalk, with the same trimmed hedges, the same porch flags, the same wind chimes swaying gently in the early breeze, but something had shifted, something he couldn't quite name. He passed by the woman's house. Her curtain moved. Not all the way, just a small twitch, like she was peeking but didn't want to be seen. For a second, he kept walking, but then he stopped, just for a breath. And then it happened, something so small most people wouldn't even notice. She raised her hand, just a little wave. Not confident, not cheerful, just ... hesitant. He stood, still, then slowly lifted his hand and returned the gesture. His face didn't change. No smile, no frown, just a calm nod. And then he kept walking. Inside her kitchen, she sat back down. She hadn't even realized she'd gotten up to look, but she had. And now her heart beat a little faster, not with fear, but with something unfamiliar, something close to regret. She had spent 5 years looking through that window, watching, judging, deciding, but she had never once walked across the street to say hello, never once asked a name, never once knocked on a door that wasn't part of her social circle. She hadn't realized until yesterday just how many stories she had written in her head about people she'd never spoken to. And now, too late for comfort, she realized how dangerous those stories could become. In his home, his mother sat, with a cup of coffee in one hand and her laptop open on the table. Her fingers moved carefully across the keys, typing up her incident report. Not out of anger, not even out of revenge, but because truth needs to live somewhere other than whispers. She detailed everything: how the officers handled the call, how her son was treated, how the neighbor responded. She included the parts that mattered: the calm, the assumptions, the badge, the silence. She'd written hundreds of reports before, but this one felt heavier. This one had her son's name in it. Down the hall, he was packing his books for school. The events of the day before still lingered like a fog that refused to burn off, but he was moving forward. That's what his mom had taught him. Keep going. Keep doing the work. Keep walking tall even when you feel small. He looked down at the key in his hand, the same one he'd used yesterday, the one that had almost become the reason for suspicion. And something hit him. It wasn't just that someone thought he didn't belong. It was that they thought that way so quickly, so easily. Like it didn't even take effort. That's what stayed with him. Not the sirens, not the questions, not even the stare from the woman across the street. It was how normal it had felt to her to question him. How natural it had been for her to assume danger where there was only routine. And the scariest part? She wasn't trying to be cruel. She thought she was helping. That realization would take longer to digest. Back across the street, the woman sat in silence. She had told herself all night that it wasn't about race, but she had done what any neighbor would do. That she'd been cautious, not judgmental. But the truth now was harder to escape. She hadn't called because something happened. She had called because something didn't feel right, and that feeling came from her. She thought about the boy's eyes, how calm they were. Not scared, not angry, just tired. Tired in a way a teenager shouldn't have to be. Tired like someone who had lived through too many conversations like this already. She didn't know what to do now. She didn't know how to fix it. Maybe she couldn't, but she could start by admitting what she hadn't before. That her fear had come from a story she told herself. And that story had been wrong. Across the street, the mother finished her report and closed the laptop. She took a sip of coffee and stared out the window, watching the same street she always had. But today, it didn't feel like the same street anymore. Not because it had changed. Because it had finally revealed itself. She knew more days like this would come for her son, for others. But today had shown something important. That silence is a choice. And sometimes a single voice spoken calmly, clearly, without apology can echo louder than sirens. Later that evening, the boy sat at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, textbooks open in front of him. The numbers on the page blurred together, not because he didn't understand them, but because his thoughts were still wrapped around everything that had happened. The day had ended the way most days did, quiet, ordinary. But he didn't feel ordinary. He felt aware. His mom walked in and placed a cup of tea beside him, just the way he liked it. No words, just presence, and that sometimes was enough. He looked up at her. Do you think it'll happen again? She didn't rush to answer. She sat down slowly, folding her hands in front of her, her gaze steady. I hope not, she said. But yes, it might. He nodded. Somehow, he already knew that. Will it ever stop? He asked, softer now. She looked at him, her son, her whole world, and gave him the truth. Not unless people learn and listen and let themselves be uncomfortable. They sat in silence. For a while, the hum of the fridge the only sound in the room. The clock ticked on like nothing had happened. But something had. Something had changed, both outside their home and within it. Across the street, the woman who made the call stood. By her window again, not peeking, just looking. Really looking. She had spent the afternoon replaying her words, the police arriving, the boy's calm voice, the mother's badge, her questions. And then, the worst part, the realization that she hadn't seen a threat. She had invented one. Because of a hoodie, because of skin color. Because of the invisible fear she carried but never questioned. And now, for the first time in years, she saw her street differently. She saw not just fences and mailboxes, but stories. People, lives she had never taken the time to learn. That evening, she did something she had never done before. She opened her front door, stepped out, and walked across the street. She didn't have a plan, no speech prepared, just a need to try. She rang the bell and waited. Her hands trembled slightly. When the door opened, it was the mother who stood there. They looked at each other in the golden light of sunset. One composed, one uncertain. "I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice small but sincere. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I was wrong. I judged your son without knowing him. I saw something that wasn't there because I've never really looked at anyone who didn't look like me." The mother didn't speak at first. She just listened. The woman went on. "I thought I was being protective, but I was being something else. And I want to do better. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say that." Out loud. There was another silence, this one not awkward but honest. The mother nodded. "It's not about forgiving. It's about recognizing and doing better from here." The woman nodded back, tears threatening but not falling. She turned to leave, but the door remained open behind her just a little. Inside, the boy watched from the hallway. He had heard every word. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like a victim either. He felt like a person who had been seen for the first time, clearly, painfully, but honestly. That night, he sat at his desk and finished his math homework. Then he opened a blank page in his journal and wrote one line at the top. "I was home." That should have been enough. He didn't need to explain it. He just needed to remember it. And across town, the report his mother filed landed on the desk of a senior officer, someone who didn't know the family, who would never walk Elm Street, but who would read every line and maybe think a little harder about the next suspicious call. The story didn't end with punishment, it ended with reflection. And that, in itself, was powerful. In the days that followed, something new began to stir in the neighborhood. A couple of families talked about the incident in quiet voices over dinner. One man brought it up at the next homeowners meeting. Someone else brought cookies to the house with the blue flower pots. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The boy kept walking to school, kept tutoring younger kids, kept being who he was because who he was never needed fixing. And the neighborhood? Well, maybe it learned something too. Not just about assumptions, but about the quiet courage it takes to confront them. This story isn't about a false call or a badge that changed everything. It's about what we choose to see or ignore. It's about who we fear and who we trust and why. It's about the weight of silence and the strength it takes to speak. And above all, it's about a teenager who deserved to walk through his own front door without having to explain why he belonged there. Because belonging isn't earned by behavior. It's a birthright. And that's not too much to ask. That's just being human.